Before we get started with today's interview, just a quick reminder, click the thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and ding the bell so that you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. Now, on to today's interview. Welcome back, everybody. Today, my guest is composer Chee-Hwa Tan, and she has a lot of pieces on the new Federation Festival list. I'm so excited to talk to her today. Welcome, Chee-Hwa.
Thank you.
Talk to us a little bit about your musical background. Do you come from a musical family?
Well, not officially. My parents, neither of them had the opportunity for music study, just coming from where they came from. So, however, my mom is an artist, a Chinese brush artist, and so I was immersed in, always exposed to the arts, and I had one of my aunts was a ballet dancer, so I grew up in the dance world by default. Not much choice there, just had to take the classes. But so I didn't realize as I was an adult how much that impacted, because it's the visual and the movement part of the arts, and I'm in music. But I think of it always in that aspect.
Wow. Well, in what ways do you feel the ballet training and all of the exposure to visual art informs what you do now as a composer and as a pianist?
Well, that's a good question. As you get older, you think about this more. I think I took it for granted all these years. But now when I think about it, I realize that I've always approached playing and teaching, especially teaching, from the viewpoint of movement and choreography towards producing a sound. I've always understood that connection, that gesture is not for show, but gesture is to produce a certain sound, and the different type of gesture also produces a certain type of emotion. Which is technique. Technique, sound. To me, sound and technique are the same thing. And as far as the visual, I hear things in visuals. The emotion, when I look at a painting or the other part is words. I grew up loving to read with literature and poetry and just, actually in both languages, in Malay as well. And I guess when I read beautiful poems or phrases, I hear sound.
I love that synesthetic connection that you make between the visual and the sound world. That is so cool. What originally drew you to piano, and what was your introduction to piano?
So when I was, now, first of all, I did not grow up here. I grew up in Malaysia, which is in Southeast Asia. And so it was very, very different. I did not have access. Never really heard an orchestra until I was a teenager. I think it was the Rochester Philharmonic that traveled. That's how clearly I can remember it, because it was such a big event. When I was in a military family, and I spent my earliest years, like up to age 5 in England. And because my dad was getting training in the military, and when we came back to Malaysia, we were in the military camp in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. And I think that my parents found my mother had always loved music, but growing up without those resources, had always just watched her friends taking music and dance. And so she talked my dad she had this vision that we need to do music. So believe it or not, the commissary, it had a piano. So they bought a Yamaha piano from the military commissary when I was 5. And I had that all the way till I finished my diplomas with the Associated Board Royal Schools of Music. So as far as background, I grew up in ABRSM, doing that syllabus. And I was very, very fortunate, because sequencing of concepts and technique and theory is just something I grew up with. And I remember my first 2 years, my mother sitting with me, and I talk to her now, and she says that she studied specially to keep me motivated. So it was John Thompson teaching little fingers to play, just confessions. And I remember she was like in grade 2 ahead of me, and I was just trying to get there, and she'd sit and practice with me, and I would cry for 2 years because it wasn't fun to practice. And then somehow I was able to play, and somehow I connected. I just remember playing the Bach minuet, the G major. It's not like it's so romantic, right? But somehow I connected to it, and I just remember trying it different ways, different emotions. It was obviously for an exam, but just and when I was upset about something, just playing it over and over again in different ways. So somehow from young, I connected to the fact that I could emote with the music, and I did not think about being a pianist at first. I remember falling in love with music, thinking this is the most wonderful thing. Maybe I'll be a composer. And then I thought about it. I mean, growing up, Chinese background, you just want to be really good at something. And I thought, but they don't seem to be any women composers. Well, I'm doing Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, Chopin, and I'm in love with them. But then it dawned on me that how come there are no women, and definitely no Asians, but I'm not even sure I thought about that. Mostly I thought that there were no women and that everybody was dead. So you had to be, and somewhere along the way, I think it was communicated to me that you had to be dead for at least 50 years and people still wanted your music, then you're a composer. So I thought, so probably not going to be a good composer. So then I thought, well, maybe I can be a conductor. And then I looked around, and it's not like I had tons to look at, to be honest, but they were definitely all male. And so I thought, for some reason, women must not be as good at waving their hands, So I remember very clearly, maybe at about 8, having this thought, I guess I'll just have to be a pianist.
That is so unfortunate, but it's such a cool thing that young women have the opportunity to have people like you to look up to. And hopefully this is going to help change things and really encourage more young women to become composers. I think that is awesome, that despite not having someone that you could look at and say, oh, I want to be like that person, you persevered and you did it and became so successful. That is just so cool. What an inspiring story. What were your first steps in composing?
So coming from that background, I spent the first part of my life focusing on performing, the art of performing. And all I wanted to be then was a concert pianist. What do we all want to be? And and then when I was in college, I remember taking and I always did, ABRSM always has composing a component in its syllabus. But I think I never quite made that connection about it being fun composing. I thought of it more as an assignment that had to do away from the piano. And so that wasn't so fun, because what's fun is getting to the piano and, doing it. And so when in college, I took the requisite composition course. So I'm assigned to do something, so I do it. And I really enjoyed it, but I still didn't think of it as a possibility. However, I do remember thinking I had this idea of composing, got to compose different genres. So when it came to voice, I thought, I could do a vocal piece and flute. I wonder how flute would sound accompanying the voice with piano. And I talked to my performance professor about it. And I said, can I put this on my senior recital? And, I am grateful to her that she didn't squish it and say, oh, you need to have, this. But she let me add that on. So I did do that. And then I just moved on and people loved it. I didn't really do anything more. And then when I was in graduate school, I happened to take, they had a pedagogical composition course taught actually by Dr. David Karp at Southern Methodist University. And I remember we had to go through tons of pedagogical literature. And I had already gone through them for my pedagogy courses. But, I wasn't, but it was mostly just and I saw the connection because of that ABRSM background. I saw the connection, the sequences. He made us look at sequences of technique and musical concepts. And I totally saw them. And the assignment was to create a piece every week, pedagogical composition every week. And so being very practical and being very busy because I was working 4 jobs, putting myself through grad school and teaching and playing for the ballet, I thought, well, I'm not just going to write a piece for no reason. So I looked at the cohort of students I had, and there was a group class that I was teaching that had about 6 to 8 8-year-olds, very energetic, very distractible. And I was trying to get them to the cross from late elementary out of the method book into early intermediate into the classics repertoire, right? That's the black hole. That's what we call the black hole.
Yes.
That's where you lose them.
Yes.
And they cycle. What I've seen is sometimes they cycle forever and they go into deep depression, and so does the teacher. So I thought, well, they need hand independence. They need some be able to handle, balancing an accompaniment, question and answer phrases, moving across the keyboard, singing, developing a singing melody. How would I get them to do that without suffering, with as minimal suffering on both ends as possible? And I thought, I need to distract them. So I thought, well, how would you distract them? How do you distract kids? A story would distract them. And how would I use a story? And then I thought, well, I love poetry. Couldn't I use that somehow? So I chose my favorite collection of poems called by Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, he wrote a child's garden of verses. And I used to sit there and just read them when I was feeling blue. I'll just read through poems. I read through Shakespeare too. Those are a bit more gloomy. But anyway, I would look through them and I thought, what if I made little etudes that dealt with technique to get a certain sound, but I didn't call it that. And I made them sound like the poem. So each week I would think of a technique that I wanted these students to acquire. And I would look for a poem that had a certain feeling and for that technique, because the technique gives you the emotion, right? And then I created them and I tried to focus on one single difficulty. So they're not easy, but I made everything else accessible except for that one thing that they had to get. But I was hoping that if they were kind of captivated in their imagination by the poem, they'd be motivated to do the gritty work of getting that technique for the sound.
That makes so much sense. And I love Robert Louis Stevenson. The Child's Garden of Verses was something that was read to me at least once or twice a week when I was growing up. And I still remember them. So yes.
Oh my goodness.
So how cool that you did that. Mm-hmm. So what is the title of the collection that has those pieces? I'm very interested to know now.
So that collection is titled A Child's Garden of Verses. And that first collection, and it has 8 pieces in them. And every single piece meets a purpose for the future, for your future as a pianist. Although they don't know that. So what happened was you need to know, I never thought of this about publishing. So I just use them for my students, my graduate students. Then when I was teaching at SMU, went on faculty, they would photocopy them at Kinko's for me as a set. And we would tell the students, when you've learned the piece, you can illustrate, you can do the illustrations for them, and you can do your cover. And so they all did them. They did them in recitals as a set. They recited the poems. I think they were just as excited about getting to recite the poems, to get to speak before playing, as they were about playing it. And this went on for about 3 years. I mean, we kept using it about that level. And then one day a friend said to me, I'm tired of photocopying this. Why don't you get it published? And I thought, oh no, I don't think I can do that. And she said, well, you tell me what publishes and I will write the letter and send it in for you. What a friend. She believed in it when I did not.
That's amazing.
And so she submitted it and it went and it came back, went to Alfred, came back, went to Nicholas, came back. Then it went to Frederick Harris Music Publishers, which is the Canadian publisher for RCM. And they wanted it. And because maybe they're Canadian, maybe being a Commonwealth country, having that love of literature, they invested like no one else would have. And so those collections, I think, is a one-time, you'll never have it again like that. They got the illustrator to do the illustrations based on the poetry. And it's a work of art. I had nothing to do with that part of it because they were the publisher and I just,
Oh, that's really cool. So what are some things as you matured as a composer that challenged you, that really helped you to step up your game and become even better?
When I was focusing on advanced, like the pre-college and beyond, I noticed very clearly how I'm always just working in transfers, story of my life and your life probably, and how I'm always doing remedial, and because they just so crave wanting to make music beautifully and they want artistry, but in order to do that, you have to fill in the gaps. So I started thinking even more about how important it is to have music that helps you fill in the gaps. But what do you do when you already have advanced skills, but you need to fill in these artistry gaps? How do you do it in a meaningful way that's easy and makes you feel like an artist still? So that has been the reason I came up with the idea of my latest series, Once Upon a Journey, that addresses, I flipped the paradigm on the head of addressing emotion first. And then out of the emotion, processing. My question was, how do you process emotion as a musician? How do you process emotion in music? Other than saying it makes me feel good. So then how do you get a story? Can you then identify a story out of your emotion and then go to the technique, which is the sound? Which I've always gone to the technique first, technically, because that's how we're trained, But I thought, it's really all about the emotion. That's why I'm still in music. And I don't want to quench the emotion and add it on at the end. So that I would say working with students, with people and seeing their needs, sitting and hearing the needs of people, even as a mom, sitting at games, softball games, soccer games, and hearing people's dreams about everybody. Do you realize that everybody has a dream about being a musician somehow? And they mostly think what they come up with is either it was a failed attempt in their music study, or they're not good enough, they're not talented enough. And I feel everybody can express something in music. I really, really do. I've never seen a student that couldn't when you help them.
I love that openness that music is for everyone and that there's a place for everybody to do this. What role do restrictions play in your compositions and in your composing?
Wow, that's a very astute question. My composing would be a whole lot easier if I had no restrictions. But restrictions play a big role. And what I've noticed is as I have allowed myself to write at the more advanced level and for different instruments, the interesting thing I noticed was that restrictions are still there and restrictions are important. In fact, I don't think of them so much as restrictions as I think of them as limitations or boundaries, which let's just say this could be converted. You could translate that to mean structure, accessibility, access, because the way I think about it, what's the point of me writing the most beautiful, say, cello piece or piano piece in the world, and very few people can play it? So, for example, I did write I think, in my opinion, a very lovely vocal piece for soprano, and I based it on the voice of the soprano that was asking for the piece. But then later I realized, wow, that's a challenging piece. Now, I don't do that. I have not traditionally done that in piano, but I thought, oh my gosh, I never realized there's so much I need to learn. And that's lovely. People at a certain level can play. Then I started thinking, but it would be so lovely if, more of a percentage of singers could sing it too. So there you go. Restrictions matter.
Absolutely.
Boundaries and limits matter.
How do you approach starting a new composition? I know I talk to many composers who will say, I see that blank page and it's just so daunting. And how do you bring a piece to completion so that you don't have a million things that are started and nothing that's finished?
I have several ways actually of doing that. It just depends on the purpose of the piece. If it's a didactic piece, and by that I mean something that you would use for developmental learning, I think in terms of the need of the student. It depends. Are you wanting something at the beginner level, which is the hardest level to compose for? It's like, really? You have to say, Now, I do believe in saying, but maybe part of the reason why I believe this is because of having to learn that the beginning level is saying more with less. And how can you make it meaningful? How can it be something that I want to play? And that's how I judge it. If I don't want to play this, I don't teach it. If I can't tell you the value of this for me, I don't want to teach it. I just tell my pedagogy students, if you don't know why you should teach this piece, don't teach it, because there's so much music out there that you can pick from. So when I approach a didactic piece is very different. I approach it from who is going to play this, or if it's an open, like I can do anything I want, then I think, where do I think there is a need right now? Where is there a gap right now? Because I guess my personality is such that I don't like to add more to what there is a lot of. Where are they not getting enough where they can feel really like connect to the music and feel free? That's what I really want, is for whoever plays the piano, whether it's an advanced student or developing student, that they will be able to move and express naturally. So they feel like an artist, the way I love to feel like an artist and you like to feel like an artist. So that's how I start didactically, very practically. Then I think of the technical concepts, and then I sit and I away from the piano, and I traditionally would just listen. I would just make some space in my mind and listen to what kind of feeling or sound I wanted. I think I maybe go by feeling. I don't think I realized that for many years. I thought it was the sound. But I think I start by just thinking, what kind of emotion could we do with here? Could we explore? That's not so common, and then I start thinking of the sounds. And of course, once you start thinking of sounds, it's related to patterns. And then I start limiting those patterns based on the sequence of what level I want the pianist to be at. The other way I do it, which as the levels get more advanced, then I have the freedom to, I do sometimes just I do often sit down and just improvise. But at the early levels, what I find is if I do that, I get carried away and it gets too difficult. Maybe that's the reason. I'm sorry, it's very organic for me, but sometimes I sit down and I tootle at the piano, so I tell my students to do just to kind of get a feeling for something. Then I might step away and simplify but every once in a while, when I've got the concept, especially at the intermediate level on up, I could sit down and just create as I go and hear where it's going. And I have had instances where that was exactly what I used, that somehow it stayed within the limitations.
Absolutely. That's really good insight. I love how you have all of these techniques that you use to see things through, and you're using those restrictions that we talked about earlier to help inform what you can and cannot do and stay within those boundaries as you are composing for students at all of these different levels. Chee-Hwa Tan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. My guest has been Chee-Hwa Tan. Her new pieces are on the Federation Festival bulletin list, and you can find them at pianosafari.com. Thank you, Chee-Hwa.
Thank you.